Western's London terminus added to the myth. Paddington Station was set in the West End of London, not in the city or south of the river like all the other railways. And Brunel's great edifice even boasted a cathedral-like roof under which the citizens of the Thames Valley and the west of England came and went about their business. The Great Western's locomotives also fussed about under the two arches, and all had a family look about them, one of the strongest house stars of any great corporation before the war. They were unlike any other railway's engines, the product of a long line of continuous development from the turn of the century to the formation of British Railways in 1948. It's the period since the formation of British Railways that forms the basis of this programme, showing how the Great Western flag still flies today. The railway preservation movement sees to that. The steam locomotive has always aroused strong passions in boys and men. And it's the young lads who stood at the end of the platforms and took the engine's numbers who went on to preserve their memories by buying and restoring locomotives to full working order. They've created one of today's major leisure industries, keeping the power of steam alive for future generations. Taking the numbers was a hobby that many could not understand, but the loco spotters of the 50s and 60s were a serious bunch, for whom every spare moment was spent on platform ends or in the very home of the steam engine, the locomotive shed. Their names spelt magic for the enthusiast and still evoke passion. Old Oak Common, Lara, Bristol Bath Road, Cardiff Canton, all meant one thing: Great Western steam engines, and plenty of them. Here the engines were serviced, supplied with water, coal, oil and sand. They were cleaned and stabled under cover, although by the early 1960s cleaning had gone out of the window as British Railways prepared to abandon steam and modernise. The locomotives may have been dirty, but the dirtiest word was diesel, the engines which were to replace those living machines which breathed fire. Steam engines are very labour-intensive, and being the product of Victorian engineering, were reliant on the availability of cheap and plentiful labour. As that evaporated, so less labour-intensive locomotives had to replace them, and it became the dream of the 1960s enthusiasts to cop as many steam engines as possible before they all went. Clubs and societies proliferated, perhaps the greatest being the Ian Allen Loco Spotters Club of the 1950s and 60s, whose Bible listed every locomotive by class and number, the Ian Allen ABC. 5901 Hazel Hall is duly underlined and details are checked. The book listed all the locomotives of British Railways and gave full constructional details of each class. The very first locomotive listed was the ex-Vale of Rydal narrow gauge number 7 Owen Glendower, which hasn't been seen yet. So we'll start our survey at the beginning and the end, as number 7 survived in BR ownership until 1988. The Great Western had inherited a number of steam engines from smaller companies absorbed in 1922, and these were given numbers at the beginning of the series, as the Great Western had a unique numbering system of its own, using 4 numerals. The 3 Vale of Rydal engines were narrow gauge and put at the beginning. From 1968, when BR replaced its final standard gauge or full-size steam engines, the little Welsh tank engines were BR's only steam engines. Sale to the private sector came in 1988. This was the official farewell, the real end of BR steam. Standard gauge Great Western engines bore 4 numerals, the second of which was the most significant. The 100 series consisted of a class of 262 tank engines, all in the 3100, 41, 51, 61 and 8100 ranges. All were variations on a theme and known as large prairies. The main variants were in wheel size, 8100s, and boiler pressure, 6100s. They were very versatile machines and could be seen on a great variety of workings throughout the Great Western system, from suburban passenger to mixed traffic and freight duties. A number of them have been preserved, the best known being this engine 6106, seen just before British Railways withdrew it from service, and then more recently, in its preserved form, working on loan to the Nene Valley Railway at Peterborough. Note its livery, with the simple initials G.W.R, the last livery of the Great Western Railway. The locomotive is based at Didcot, home of the Great Western Society. It spent many summers on loan to preserved railways and is seen here on the G.W.R. once again, the Gloucester and Warwickshire Railway, a former G.W.R. main line, which runs from Toddington near Cheltenham in the Cotswolds. The 200s include our first tender engines, the 060 2251 class designed by Charles Collett in the 1930s. One out of 120 built survives and is on the West Somerset Railway. These engines could work over most of the railway system and were designated mixed traffic. This indicates they were suitable for both freight and passenger duties, as seen here. Both 2200 and 3200 series were assigned to these engines. The Collett 060s were built to replace earlier designs of 060s, which were known as Dean goods after their designer William Dean. These Victorian machines were mechanically similar to the Collett engines, but had a very different boiler outline. This was the style of Great Western engines up until the beginning of the century, when George Jackson Churchward began a revolution in locomotive design, which led to the classic Great Western locomotive outline, with a brass safety valve cover and copper-capped chimney. The Dean outline was in the Victorian tradition, with a tall chimney and a massive steam dome. Massive is the epithet for the next type of 200, the 42, 52 and 7200s. Indeed, this locomotive, preserved on the Torbay and Dartmouth Railway in Devon, is named Goliath, a name added in preservation, as the G.W.R. only named its passenger tender engines. Those engines were mainly to be seen at work in the Welsh coalfields, but were used all over the system for various tasks, such as here at Ledbury as banking or helper engines. The 300s were tender engines, also seen throughout the system. They were 260s, known as moguls. These locomotives bring into focus Churchward's locomotive design philosophy. In the early 1900s, he drew up a building program of standard designs, which were to cover all traffic requirements. These were the modern designs, with Belpaire fireboxes and tapered boilers, 2 or 4 outside cylinders, and standard wheel sets. Strangely enough, the moguls didn't feature in the standard lineup as originally devised by Churchward. But when in 1911 they were added, very few new drawings were needed, as they were an amalgam of the other standard designs, a vindication of Churchward's policy. The 1400 tank engines were direct replacements for earlier 042 tanks used for local passenger duties. The special coaches, or auto coaches, enabled the locomotives to be controlled from the wrong end via a system of push rods. This cut out wasteful time at terminals, where conventional locomotives had to run round to be at the head of the train. A number of these little engines have been preserved, including 1466 seen at Didcot, where the Great Western Branch Line atmosphere has been recreated to perfection. Also seen at Didcot is an example of the earliest of Churchward's work, the famous City of Truro, the first locomotive in the world to have been recorded in excess of 100 miles an hour. The wheels are enclosed, and the locomotive has 2 pairs of frames, inside and outside, an interim design phase between Churchward and his predecessor, Dean.